All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Fencing Flops. This week we're going to be looking at the episode Graduation Day Part 1, the 21st episode for the third season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So let's go ahead and take a look.
Brutally stabbed.
Okay, so I immediately want to stop right there. The reason is because there are two glaring things that they got wrong that I honestly don't really think I need to mention, but I will because that's kind of the whole point of this. The first thing is they're not using masks. This is a huge thing. A lot of studios like to show their their actors not wearing masks. I think a lot of times the storytelling reason behind it is because they're just so good that, they can always defend themselves no matter what. This doesn't really happen. Nowadays it's required. But even if it wasn't, any coach worth their salt nowadays would use at least a mask. There are some drills where there's one or two pieces of protective equipment that you don't really need. It kind of depends on the weapon and the exact scenario. But especially for Saber, where the head is a main common target to aim for, you definitely want a mask. Because even if you're not aiming for the mask, as good as you might be, you're human and you're not perfect. So mistakes can be made. And if they're made, then, someone could lose an eye, and then there could potentially be a lawsuit and a lot of negative media attention and a lot of people asking why weren't they wearing the things that they were supposed to be wearing so that they wouldn't get hurt. Then just everyone looks like an idiot. So there's no reason other than really pride to not wear a mask. You should absolutely always, 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 if you're that close to someone with a blade, wear a mask. So that's immediately the first thing. The second thing is a very common trope that I've seen. When I was a kid, it was entertaining, but now it's not. And it's the whole, I don't have to look at you to, fence you off. They're clearly not fencing, they're clearly practicing, but even then, it's like, there's nothing really to be gained from this. You're basically just showing off, but you're in a drill. There's no reason to show off in a drill. Two immediate tropes that came up that they always really bug me a lot. But again, it's kind of obvious why they're unrealistic. So, but it's part of the scene, so I felt I had to mention it. But let's keep going.
Visiting professor of geology. There's nothing in here that bellows motive.
Random killing, perhaps? Fit of rage? Everybody does seem to be going a bit mad lately. Faith has something of a head start.
Doesn't read. I think it's homework.
The mayor wanted the good professor out of the way.
So in the past, I've never really been too nitpicky about certain things, but this time I think I will. First of all, even though they're practicing, they're not really following a set method. I mean, you could technically say that they are because this is, all scripted and everything, so they each know what the other is about to do. But the way that it's set up, it's very random. In every drill that I've seen, even with coaches teaching students who are much better than I am, even when it looks like they're doing, random stuff, and even when the coach throws a curveball at the student to, test their reflexes, it's still very clearly within the bounds of a set-up framework kind of thing. Like, it's not like they're going to be, exchanging cuts and parries, and then all of a sudden the coach sweeps the leg out from underneath the student.
Sweep the leg.
It's like that is entirely outside the realm of what they're going to be expecting. So even when the coach does something that maybe the student wasn't expecting that particular attack, then, it's still something that could happen, that is within the realm of possibility, to occur in a bout. So it's still within that framework. This is kind of a random back and forth with odd timing. I understand they're having a conversation in the middle of it, which, obviously it kind of goes along with the masks and the not looking is like there's no reason for it other than story. So they're making it look really cool and like these guys know exactly what they're doing, but it's really just like a hodgepodge of different things that have been kind of misconstrued, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The thing that I want to nitpick about is their form, especially since, because of the tropes that I mentioned before, they're supposed to be like, experts on this thing. I don't really follow the show too much, but I do know that this character, Giles, is, I think he's supposed to be like some sort of weapons expert that he taught the Vampire Slayer, and supposedly she knows how to use a ton of different weapons. But in this case, it's clear that he's not very familiar with it, that the only thing he knows how to do is the exact parries that he has been taught for this scene. There are a few things, like I can immediately tell all of his parries are too wide. It is a little bit hard to tell with his parry 3 and kind of with his parry 4, because those are at such an angle to the camera that it's hard to see exactly where it is. But the parry 5, the overhead parry, is this one here. And to any experienced saber fencer, it's pretty obvious that this is a lot further out than it needs to be. The parry only really has to end at the very outside of your body. Now, the thing is, some people, especially when they're learning, might go a little bit further out, because just from the shock of hitting that kind of guard, an attack can whip around, and just the physics of the blade being able to bend can still score in a touch. But the thing is, there are ways to get around that. Like, I've mentioned in previous videos, fencers combining use of distance and retreats and jump backs to aid in their defense, as well as something called lockout time for the machine, but that's a whole other can of worms I'm not going to get into. So basically, the thing is, the parry doesn't have to go very much further out than the very outside body line. And I actually know some coaches who teach, at least for priority weapons, their students to end their parries a little bit closer to that. Because if you place it right, then you don't even need to go out that far. But the point is, his absolute maximum for his parry should be at least like 1 or 2, well, no, not even 1 or 2, more like 3 or 4 inches closer to his head than that. Because the thing is, once you start going past that maximum, like, it's the maximum for a reason. Once you start going past that, you're wasting time and energy, and you're just then making it harder on yourself to follow up with a correct riposte. So yeah, his parries are too wide, and you can also tell not just when he's switching between the parries, but also when he's attacking back, his wrist is both too tight and also doing too much work. It's kind of this weird in-between. But basically, you can tell his arm isn't very loose, and he's not using his fingers at all. Keeping the arm nice and relaxed and utilizing your fingers in your grip when controlling the blade allows saber fencers, and well, actually every kind of fencer, to more efficiently control their blade with a lot less movement and therefore make it a lot faster. If they can cut down the travel time or the travel distance from point A to point B with their blade, then it just makes that attack that much faster. And that level of control can also be utilized for a lot of other things rather than just straight attacks. So his arm he's using it with the wrong joints, and it's also too stiff, that I can tell. And his opponent also has this problem. His arm is usually way too high. It's just too far out of alignment, which goes, again, into the whole category of you're just wasting movement and not being efficient with it. So a lot of his attacks aren't very straight. They're coming in very wide, which means they're easy to see, which is not what you want to do. You want to keep your attacks centered as close as possible. And then this is also why you want to utilize your fingers a lot more, because it allows you to target different areas of your opponent very easily, but at the same time makes all those different attacks look very similar. So it's easier to set up a feint attack or, some sort of second intention, where basically your first movement is not the movement intended to score. It is intended to draw your opponent into something. It's basically an easy way to say deception. But the thing is, there's not even a reason for a coach to have obvious attacks unless they're teaching, beginner students who need that extra warning to tell where it's coming from. Because the thing is, if you take lessons with a coach and they always attack very obviously so that you can parry them, and then you go into a bout where you have an uncooperative opponent all of a sudden, they're not going to do that same thing. So the coach is there to make you better at dealing with that kind of situation. So if they always attack with things that are very easy to see coming, then, that's not going to make you any better. It's going to make you worse. So their form is rather awful. Since they're not moving too much, I will give them a pass on their actual footwork and stuff, because it's not really being utilized here at all. So let's keep going.
The mayor's trying to hide. I say we go seek.
By attempting to keep a valuable clue from us, the mayor may have inadvertently led us right to it.
So that's pretty much the end of the actual fencing exchanges. They didn't really do too much more, but there was one thing that I wanted to point out. It was an indicator that this was shot a long time ago, but it's also an indicator that they didn't really pay attention to the weapons that they were using, which was the fact that the little area on the knuckle guard where it comes up to the pommel was uninsulated. It was basically bare metal to bare metal. The reason why this is actually kind of a big deal in Saber is because of how Saber is hooked up. Because you can use the entire length of the blade to score, it means that the really only good way to make sure that the entire blade can be counted on, instead of having, a blade full of sensitive triggers like foil and epee, instead it is just all conductive. So when it even just lightly brushes against the conductive metal jacket of the opponent's valid target area, which is their entire torso, arms, and head, then the entire thing goes off. So it only takes a single electron to make the machine light up. Now, this doesn't necessarily make it particularly easy to score, because Saber also uses right-of-way, which I have gone over in the past, and there are a lot of other videos, and I'll probably include some examples in this as well. So even though it's not the easiest to score in, it is the easiest to make the light go off. However, this can be a double-edged sword. Because that blade extends down into the grip and ends at the pommel, which is this little nut that you see right here. And if you'll notice, this part right here is also touching it. And, like I said before, the arm is valid target area, and that extends up to the wrist. The hand is not included in that. So if your bottom pommel, and in some very extreme cases, I guess even the very bottom of the knuckle guard, is too close to usually the arm, or in some cases even the torso, like if you have your arm tucked in, then this will complete a circuit that's not meant to be completed. And what it means is that when your opponent hits your blade while you're making that connection, usually with a bent wrist, then that means that the entire blade will now react the same way that the lame will. Now, normally, with an insulated pommel, this connection can never be made, and your opponent can hit your blade as much as they want, and the machine will never light up. That's how it's supposed to go. Because the machine is only supposed to light up for when you hit valid target area, and obviously the sword is not valid target area. But if you hold it wrong with an uninsulated pommel, then it does become valid target area. And this can just become very annoying. So it's a small thing, but it's something that you have to pay attention to, especially since if something like that happens, it's actually usually pretty embarrassing, because it's an indicator that not only do you have outdated equipment, but you also have a bad stance. And you could argue that, they're not hooked up to machines, but the thing is, there's so little difference between a non-electric saber and an electric saber that, pretty much everyone uses electric sabers, sabers that are meant for tournaments, for competition, for actual suited up practice, that, I don't know of anyone who has a practice saber. It's really just a waste of money. You might as well get an electric saber, because it's suited for more purposes, and it's almost exactly the same. But there is one last scene. It technically doesn't really have anything to do with fencing, but it's so ridiculous I wanted to include it.
That's one spunky little girl you've raised. I'm gonna eat her. Whoa! Well, no, that was a little thoughtless.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to include. This is obviously very ridiculous. The blades are meant to bend, and they are blunted, and, simply put, they're designed to not even be able to break skin. Even if, for some reason, you did use it against someone who didn't have equipment, which I can't really say is not realistic in this case, because he's obviously not fencing someone, he's attacking someone. But the part that is unrealistic here is that blade would never have made it that far in. Even if, by some miracle, he stabbed hard enough and at just the right angle that the blade was not really able to bend properly, like it is designed to, then, the blade, even if it did break human skin, it would not have made it very far. This is a close-up of what the end of any saber blade looks like. As you can see, it is not sharp whatsoever. And this is a good example of how flexible those blades can be. Now, this is slow motion, so it kind of throws it to the extreme a little bit, but the point is very clear. This would never have happened. But, I get sort of the idea behind it, that, they were practicing with it earlier and it's supposed to be a sword. But, yeah, it was clearly specially made for this. There was no way that could have happened. But that's pretty much the end of all the fencing scenes. This honestly deserves a pretty low score. I can't really say much good things about it. In the past, I've said I appreciate it when a studio accepts saber or foil, because it generally has additional elements in it because of the priority that makes it more difficult. So usually I like the fact that they tried to go for it. In this case, I don't, because they clearly went for saber because it's the only weapon that you can cut in as well as thrust, and so they took that, they went to the extreme and added a lot of big sweeping actions and everything, and then I really don't like it when someone, really upplays what they're able to do and basically just, has that sort of prideful, I'm just so much better than you kind of attitude about them, which really looked like they were doing, even possibly not on purpose, with just the fact that Giles was not even looking at the person that he was supposedly helping to train. That in and of itself is just, come on, dude. You don't have to be like that. So, I would give this scene a 2 out of 10. Yeah, not really very much to say about it. But with that in the books, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Bye.